Hi there, folks. I think for those not watching the chat, I think we're going to start at 5 past or so. So if you want to grab a quick drink, go grab it now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Had to fight some audio issues. Okay. Hey, John, Cedric, Bob, Martin, Dick. Good to see you. Neil, Ori. Hey, Ray. And hi, Steve.
Hey, folks. Happy Monday.
Yeah, it's a happy Monday.
Hello.
Good. I think we could get started now. So as I mentioned at the meeting, the SCITT meeting last week, I thought it would be a good idea to have a call today, even if it's a short call, to just reflect a little bit on the IETF meeting, what action items we picked up, and kind of what the next steps are. If we wait a few weeks after the IETF meeting took place, then all our memories about it will have vanished, and so we we would start from scratch again. Like summarizing, I think the hackathon went quite well, and John gave a detailed presentation about it. I think we accomplished what we had. We accomplished our goal to put this FDA use case together. I also learned a lot new as I was playing around with the code that was available, the SCITT emulator, and with the backend, or the backends provided by Ori and by John. So that was good. It's still, hi Hank, there's still for me the question on how the SCITT emulator is going to be sort of aligned with the specification, because it's currently not so super friendly to use, because the terminology it uses for everything, for the APIs, for the command line, for everything is outdated by now. I don't know who's actually maintaining it. So that's something we should probably, or we might want to talk about. John.
Yeah, probably is worth talking about. So a couple of things. I'm currently maintaining it and have some support from others here in sort of reviews and stuff. One of the things that came out of last week is that we want to split out I think what's currently called a candidate API from the architecture document and put it in its own work product, which eventually will become an ID. possibly even an RFC at some point. So we're going to create a thing called Scrappy and put all the stuff in there. So my hope and expectation is that as we build that document, updating the API specification with a bit more correctness, like expected error codes and things like that. As we update that document, we'll update the emulator, possibly even rewrite it, but we'll update the open source code hand in hand with that to meet the original expectation that it's supposed to mirror and test the specification rather than sort of replace or drive it. So I think we should find a relatively natural way of updating it. I've got at least me and one other resource in my company who can do that, and I'm hoping to get some modest support from other folks too.
Cool. Thanks, Sean. Ray.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I was pretty happy with the whole thing. I have to say, the hackathon, I got my T-shirt on, so but I put the video on, was really well run. I think the whole event was well run. They, you know, if anyone ever thinks about going to the hackathon or this event in general, I'd say, you know, give it a shot. Now, in terms of the status of things, it appears to me that the you know, we've essentially pulled a few things out of this, and which is fine, because what it does is it gives us kind of a more solid core that can be that can be like laid to rest and not laid to rest, but you know, so solidified in such a way that probably won't need a whole lot of revision as we move up into higher levels of abstraction. So so I think the conversations were pretty good in terms of trying to understand why we were pulling out like the identity and the you know, looking at the document, the JSON object, that the vendor submission file that was suggested by Dick as a starting point. I think gives us a lot to chew on, but I think we should probably, at least I'm going to be taking a look at the election application and make a corresponding similar sort of a submission document to that, and then take a look at how to break off the identity part and probably maybe make those two different parts, because the identity doesn't have to change very often for many other submissions. But how that gets incorporated into the basal or the core, I think is still, I don't understand exactly, you know, how it's done, other than, I mean, I understand the basis of, like, if we have a signed artifact that can be submitted to this thing and someone else can check it to say, yeah, that's the same one that I have in hand. But that doesn't really close the loop on all these other things that we need to do in order to really have a full solution. So anyway, that's where I am. I didn't get a chance to work on it at all since I came back. I did not attend the rest of the meeting, although I'm watching a lot of the videos. I did go to the like quick RFC, hot RFCs presentations. There's a lot that I don't happen to know, because if you don't stay, you know, absolutely and trying to stay on the leading edge of things, you'll find out that you've missed things for the last few years that other people have been working on time and again. So that was very, very interesting. Things that are not actually applicable to this subject. But anyway, that's my take on it. I hope those reflections are useful to other people. And I will be I'll tell you what my plans are is I'm going to be, as I said, doing the election JSON thingy and trying to make some suggestions on how we can move that level forward and make sure that this underlying structure is actually compatible with what we have on top. Thanks.
Thanks, Ray, and nice T-shirt.
It's nice. It's a nice T-shirt, I have to say. Good value for the hackathon. The price of the hackathon and all the food they give you was really nice.
It's difficult to beat, yeah, or hard to beat. Roy.
It's a good day, everyone. So Ray, I had sent a few people your way. I hadn't realized you weren't there on Monday, so there's people that wanted to talk to you, so they may reach out. For the hackathon, it became very clear that we have to close down the architecture document and move forward on some of the remaining open issues in their entirety. There was one new scenario that came up post the hackathon that I haven't talked to John about, but I talked to others about, which is in the physical supply chain, in a nationalistic mechanisms, we may need a mechanism where we have more than one receipt from different SCITT instances for different global regions. But I'll start a thread on the SCITT mailing list to just discuss that. Hannes, I saw your comment of asking for the emulator. We'll see what we can do for people. It's been a heck of a week. I noticed that in the SCITT meeting, we had a few cases where hidden agendas wanted to trump and drive some part of the discussion to force it into other discussions. Thanks, Karsten, for the meeting with the Gordian envelope people, and hopefully you get some clarity there. I don't know what happened the rest of the week because I left on Monday and I've been running ever since. So,
Did you, Roy, attend the meeting about the Gordian envelopes?
oh yes, I was one of the few that remained. That we had a mass defection at some point.
Okay, is there kind of a summary of that meeting? What came out of it? It seems to be driven by some privacy requirements, which I didn't quite understood.
I wrote some stuff internally here. I will send mail to Karsten and to Hank and Ori, who are also in the room. We'll get a summary out of it. What they're trying to do is selective disclosure, and what they were trying to drive into SCITT was the concept of privacy and protection, which was kind of over and above what SCITT was trying to do. Right? If you're using a case where strong identity is required, then the notarization of the identities are configured to be that way. If you wanted to use something like DID with subtickets to mask identities, even that's supported, but that's not a configuration requirement for SCITT. Though they wanted us to put it in somewhere saying suggested and be careful and watch for this behavior. I don't know whether it belongs in the architecture document.
Okay, so I guess I have to wait for your summary and maybe read through it myself also. There's probably no recording available. Yeah.
I don't think we recorded it. It was a Zoom meeting.
Oh, really? Okay. So if
it was done outside the
official meeting.
The official path, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They were desperately trying to figure out how to get into CBOR, and we gave them suggestions on how to bring it forward. They were trying to ship yesterday and get a rubber stamp, and of course we have some thoughts, and we have to read through the document. And what they came away with is they wanted us to read the document and give them feedback and help them try and strengthen it. And the creative feedback from Karsten and Ori on what they had to do was met with a little resistance.
Okay.
I'll hand over to Hank now.
Yeah, Hank, it's your turn.
Yeah, this is Hank. I'm just trying to add on very carefully that there was some urgency by the authors, and so I think the main issue was to express the trees they need within CBOR structures natively and not using COSI at all. And people were like, but you could sign something or hash something. They said, no, we're doing it like this. And everybody's like, okay, this is an interesting approach. So maybe cut your approach in pieces, I think was the main message, because it's all in one document and you're trying to solve you're combining different approaches here, all related to CBOR somehow, including the CBOR discussion that was on the COSI mail list, or is happening on the COSI mail list. And so now, yeah, I'm not sure what they unpack from that discussion. I think there was they were sometimes a little bit irritated due to the amount of feedback, but I assume that the message, at least message of maybe do a divide and conquer and create a rationale why you want to do this in native CBOR and why it needs your specific deterministic CBOR and not the one that now is written up by Karsten as I want to say, but that was before the side meeting. As a compromise between multiple approaches. So that has to happen now. I'm not entirely sure how the authors of the Gordian envelope will react to that, but it is very specific and it is a monolithic designed. And as you can see with SCITT, we are even making approaches more generic. And this is, yeah, it's basically the other way around. So we will see how this works out. I think in general, they're smart people. But I think they figured a lot. They built a lot of hammers for nails that we have no idea how they look like at the moment. So that has to be figured out, I think.
So is there is it sort of like somewhat clear what the privacy benefit for SCITT would be?
It
is,
except for us taking it in as a payload and generating a receipt for an outer COSI wrapper. What they were trying to do was done with CBOR directly and try to use basically trees of shredding of structures to hide data. So it's not 100% belongs in our field or in our discussion. It has some interest. That's why I posted the document. So if on the side you want to give feedback and look at what they're proposing, great. But it's not something that gets pulled into COSI and SCITT per se. Karsten, did I get that correct? Is that what you got out of that as well?
I think Karsten is not on the audio. Karsten is only on the Zulip.
Okay.
okay.
Well, you can type.
Yeah.
Ray. And the key trans question was also came up, right? I left before Hank sent his mail. Was there any more follow-up with key trans? Because there seemed to be overlap between the two of them.
Yeah, that's what I was asking about. I wondered because I noticed on a schedule that their Birds of Feather was canceled, and I wondered if anyone knew anything about it. Thanks.
Yeah, I can quickly say some words to that. So apparently, and I did not actually read that, when Roman was starting the consensus call for the Keytrans Charter, he wrote, if there's enough consensus before the IETF, we can cancel the meeting and do not need a buff because there's enough consensus on list. And to his perception, that was the case. And then his strategy was without notification to cancel the buff, and that caused the confusion. So I look back, and yes, he wrote exactly that he could do that or would do that if there was enough consensus. But I think the signaling around consensus establishment was a little bit sparse, and everybody was confused why this was not happening. So the Keytrans is happening. Only the buff apparently was cancelled. So if you have any problems with the current charter, I think you can find that on the Keytrans list or in the data tracker on the Keytrans group site. And if there's something in there that is confusing, please say so. I think Keytrans is definitely only about group chats. And the only thing I highlighted is, well, if this transcends group chats from 2 to thousands of people in messaging services. So it's basically, I would call it SMIMI or whatever, I don't know. Also, but I don't know. So Keytrends was a little bit misleading name, and if the problem here is if it comes up with very specific solutions about group key transparency for messaging, and then they extend the scope to, let's say, supply chains, then we would end up with very, very different things, and that would be very, very sad. And that is the only thing that I highlighted, that if there is a scope change, that has to be taken into account. And I think SCITT is mentioned at least in the charter at the moment to be orchestrated with. And even if it's an out of scope statement that everybody agrees about.
Yeah, I can say a few words about Keytrends as well, because I met with the primary proponent of the work, Brendan Macmillan, and he basically told me what Hank just mentioned, and like their implementation or their specification is focused on messaging, specifically because they care about this end-to-end messaging and want to use the append-only log as a key store, a sort of a key value store, like where key value store is a little bit a misleading name when we talk about keys, because the key is, for in this messaging context, is the username, and the value is the public key. That's what it's designed for, and it mixes or combines two Merkle trees, namely the one we use as well, the log tree, and additionally the prefix tree for faster search. And on top of the search option, there's also, funny enough, a privacy construct called VRF used, but not the vendor response form, but the verifiable, forgot the name again, what the acronym stands for, pseudo-random function also. Some sort of privacy enhancing mechanism. And so it's a very, very much a purpose built solution, with obviously like addressing privacy requirements that are specific to messaging, right? So yeah, so it's definitely interesting to watch, but remains to be seen what comes out of it. Dick.
Thank you, Hannes. I've already written an article about this, so I'll save you from a long diatribe here. But I will say that I thought the hackathon was a great success, and I put a link to my article in the chat. A couple of things that I think were really noteworthy from that hackathon. One is that we know we need to be able to access the trust statement after it's been registered into the trust registry. And so the API that will submit the trust statement will need to provide a URL to the actual trust statement itself. And this will enable a software producer to give that to a consumer so that they can retrieve the information that's in the registry directly, sort of like a registry of deeds. So that's a key one. And the other thing too to mention is that, there is a very active software supply chain that is, used every day. And it includes things like PGP and X.509 and digital signatures using those keys. So I think it's imperative, whatever we do here, is to also accommodate what is current practice today. And I don't think it matters much how you implement it with regard to the IETF-SCITT protocol, so long as that protocol ensures the integrity of the process to register trusted statements. I think that's key. If we fail to protect the integrity of the trust registry, then we will likely have challenges in adoption. So it's imperative that we have a process and a protocol that will ensure the integrity of the material in the registry and accommodates existing practices today, and provides a link to trusted statements when registered, so that information can be exchange with parties who are interested in retrieving that data. Thanks.
Thanks, Dick. Yeah, I'm going to read your article later because I haven't noticed earlier. Thanks a lot. Good. Any other impressions from someone in the call regarding the IETF meeting or the hackathon itself? If not, I'm going to ask, like I was in the COSI meeting, and regarding the receipts presentation, I think that went pretty well. I was wondering what the timeline is. So I expected already a call for adoption to take place, because that would be important. Ori?
So I think the call for adoption did go out, unless I'm confusing it with the other call for adoptions that went out. But I'm fairly certain the COSI list has a call for adoption for the COMETER draft, which is the thing that we expect receipts to profile on top of. And also the CCF profiling draft was briefly introduced, but there was no call for adoption for that one as far as I'm aware.
Okay, then I missed it, and as soon as I look it up, I will post it to the SCITT list, because obviously there's a direct dependency to that work. Yeah, so that's excellent. Okay, I'll write this in. For what it's worth, I'm actually taking notes. Okay, good. Regarding Ray, do you want to say something about that?
I just wanted to say that the issue of the feed was something that we did discuss quite a bit, and I think there still is some a couple of different points of view about what a feed is, and it's different than what I thought it was, and what seemed to be stated in the document. But then it seemed like there was some further discussion about that may have pulled that together into one kind of uniform. I think John was pulling that together into the possibility of having several different points of view, but still able to the structure below, still able to accommodate them all. And maybe some more talk about the feed issue would be appropriate today. Thanks.
John, do you want to say something about this, like what the next steps are also on the feed topic?
Yeah, can do. So for those who watched or were in the room for my readout of the hackathon, or the code section of the hackathon, I failed to do one of the things I was supposed to do, which was to get unified submission of claims in the interoperable client interface. So I spent a little bit of last week finishing that off. So that's now on a branch in GitHub and should be merged very soon, or put up for PR rather, once I've had review from my team. So I've got that done now. And the next thing to do on the code base was to implement feeds in there and just sort of do a suck it and see kind of approach to some of the details that we want, because I won't say too much because Ori's in the queue and he'll probably give the details of where we want to take the spec in this area. But at the moment, the client doesn't take a feed at all, which means it's not conformant with the spec, where feed is a mandatory part of the unprotected header, or the protected header rather. And so I want to fix that, and then we'll see how it works with specifying just by name or by name and properties or whatever else. So that should move forward in the next week or so, hopefully in time for the next interim.
When John, when you say you created a branch, are you talking about a branch in your implementation or a branch of the architecture document?
Of the what do you call it? The thing that's currently called the emulator, but should really be the client.
Ah, okay.
It's
Okay.
a branch of actual running code in there. My thoughts, and particularly to avoid having too many instances of taking off my chair hat and putting it back on again. My kind of service to this community is mostly in trying to build what we've written in the specs and see if it actually works, and give some sort of practical hints to it rather than meddling in the building of the documents themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I've been doing alongside the work that everybody else has been working on the specs.
But I think we also need text in the specification itself.
Yes. So I think the best thing to do would be to yield the floor to Ori, who I see is in the queue, and he'll probably comment on that.
Yeah, so I think the next steps that are important for making progress on feed are to expose some URLs from the API that are related to consuming feeds, or at least to think about sort of if you had received a collection of documents that were using the feed structure and you wanted to expose a specific receipt or transparent signed statement via URL, how might that interact with the API? I think, the other challenging part here is there's the artifact repository transparency service kind of combo where they come together, and where URLs might, be built that really support discovering a specific artifact. And then there's the sort of detached mode where the transparency service and the artifact repository are like very separate. And just the URL structure around feeds and that topic, I think the API needs to sort of sort out the boundary for. And one other thing, I guess, is that if we do have some URL structures that we're starting to like, I think it's worth evaluating whether there will be data URIs or QR codes associated with some of those standard REST API interfaces. Maybe the answer is no, but I think it can be helpful to think about other cases where you've had specific elements that had a QR code associated with them. What does stealing a QR code mean in that context? Hopefully it's safe to just steal them and paste them on various things, but you want to be cautious around privacy and security considerations. As soon as you have URLs, you want to be cautious about what does it mean if that URL becomes a QR code and people start scanning it and clicking it and that kind of thing. That's it.
Yeah, Ori, what's the timeline, or Hank, or whoever is working on it, to take out the existing API description, move it into a new document, and then beef it up there? Like, are we talking about the next 2 weeks, or are we talking about like years, or what's the plan?
So I don't know the exact timeline for those kinds of changes. There was one other thing I wanted to say before I forget, which is I think the current API client does some sort of signing locally, and I guess it's worth considering whether the authenticated remote signer use case, is part of this ecosystem or not. And the reason I bring that up is that it can make interoperability testing a little bit difficult, having some of this stuff sort of split out from the client. And it's related to a number of conversations I had with other folks throughout the week around, where is the confidence in the keys that you're using to sign the signed statements, the original issuer claims about the artifact, as opposed to the confidence in the keys that are used to make the transparent signed statements, which are coming from the transparency service. So I don't know the timeline for the API, but having an independent document that can have independent pull requests and move along a little bit faster seems like a thing that we should get set up soon so that we can make parallel progress.
I agree. Dick.
Thank you, Hannes. Yeah, I think Ori hit on a really good point there. There's a lot of work, as you know, right now to post registered trust marks or trust labels. The US is doing one. We're going to have language in the FAR this September. The EU CRA has this concept of a CE mark, and the concepts are both evolving around the use of QR codes. So Ori's point about QR codes is really important, I think, because it would be viable, in my opinion, to post a QR code into a SCITT trust registry where people can retrieve that and then, look up any trust label information that may be associated with that QR code. So I think having that as a high priority use case, this use of trust labels and QR codes for that purpose, would be very beneficial, and SCITT seems to be a viable solution for that particular case. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. Hank.
Yeah, I was not sure if that was kind of implied already, but there is now a Scrappy ID that includes a raw copy. It doesn't make a lot of sense by itself without introduction and such. A raw copy of the API definitions that are currently in the architecture. Consequently, the API parts will move out of the architecture, but that was not enough reason to update it right now. So expect these to disappear from the architecture, and maybe a reference to the reference API will remain there. And yeah, this is the place to work on. So the document exists. I don't know when I did it, but I did it. It was updated 2 days ago, whatever that means. But I did it last week, I think.
But when do you plan to submit that document?
Oh yeah, it needs more love. So there is just the core API. I think as soon as John and Ori agree on core API elements, we can do a first submission, and that does not have to include all open construction site, like whatever feeds and such. So it has to be the basis for construction here, and then we can see how many levels we will build on it. So I think first submission could be relatively soon. From my gut feeling tells me that it will be start of September. Maybe earlier, but I'm just being realistic. So 4 weeks typically seems like a good.
Yeah, it depends how ambitious you
sorry?
want to be. Like you could as well start with the current API description before adding the search functionality and sort of extending that. But I assume John and Ori are your co-authors on that. So getting something out there, I think, would be good, because then, as it was mentioned earlier by Ori, we can then sort of work in parallel on those 2 documents, right?
Yeah, there's nothing inhibiting you from working on the document right now. We can do this in parallel right now. If you submit something or not is making it more visible, yes, but the working on it is not inhibited by anything.
But yeah, that's a sort of a request to the people who have the pen on that document. So that would be good. Okay. I had done a detailed review of the architecture document. Not quite sure how I should best distribute that. I did it on paper. I can scan it in and send it around, or I could as well submit pull requests or send my top 3 items to the list. I don't know.
Pull requests are super great. Everything that is more conceptual is okay with the issue. If you want to do it formally and make Ori very happy, make a tiny issue for each PR. But I think a good PR description is also fine. Please, Ori, don't throw things at me. And so I think, yeah, GitHub PRs are the most valuable contribution.
Okay. I see there's a few questions in the chat. Questions about what's a trust label and what's the idea of the QR code. I don't know if someone can can respond to that.
Yeah, Hannes, I can point to those. So two places where you can look for information about those is if you look at the European Cybersecurity Resilience Act, they talk very specifically about this use of essentially trust labels. They call them a CE mark. And it's essentially intended to provide some level of proof that a product has undergone some level of cybersecurity testing and passed some requirements. The same is also true for what's happening in the United States as well. President Biden announced that there's a new initiative that's due to be completed by September 30th, which is called the U.S. Cybersecurity Mark. And there's talk about use of a QR code that can be placed on either like an IoT device packaging or on an online website that enables the user to go look at some information about the trustworthiness of these devices by looking at the materials they submitted to achieve their certification or their trust mark. So I can put links in the chat if you're really interested in the US and the EU information on trust labeling. Thanks.
I can include the link.
So hang on a second. I have a question. So is that static or is that the dynamic evaluation? Like, can anti-malware go off and say, hey, there's actually a virus in there after the fact, or are these pre-assigned, hey, you're good to go forevermore sort of labels?
Yeah, Roy, I did some research on this, and Singapore and Finland both have what effectively are static labels. I don't know what the EU CE mark will be, and I don't know what the US cybersecurity mark will be, but I have suggested to NIST that we have dynamic labels simply because trust in software is ephemeral. It can change from one day to the next. So
in other words, you're not looking for labels. You're looking for an identifier that takes you to the data. You're basically saying, hey, QR code to a GUID and GUID to information.
Yeah, I'm just using their terminology. They call them labels. If you look at the NIST IoT labeling recommendations, that they all refer to these things as labels. I just adopt their terminology for this. But ultimately, what it does is it points to some information which you hope is trustworthy. Hence the reason why it needs to be in a SCITT trust registry, so that people can take that information, believe it when they see it, and use it to, in a risk-based buying decision. So anyway, I'll put two links into. I'll put a couple of links in the chat for people who want to know more about that. Thanks.
Thanks, Dick.
I couldn't hear if you called on me or not, but I always think it's unhelpful to throw the word trust around loosely, especially as Roy points out, if it's a static thing, because we need to assume breach and we need to continually revise those things. So if there's somebody using it, as Dick is pointing out, as if it's just a label and that's something you can slap on something and it's static, and I mean those are all the images the term conjures up for me. I think we should push back and we should say, the actual value of SCITT is that you can have statements out there that can permanently be tied back to the person who made the claim that they had fulfilled the requirements for cybersecurity, et cetera, and that can then be referred to later on if and when problems come up. So I just wonder if we can use better terminology.
Yeah, Neil, like when, from my experience, when regulators come up with things, it's difficult to convince them to use different terminology, even though I often think that they are totally off. Like my most favorite item is the zero trust concept. I'm sure you've heard about that, zero trust networking and all these sort of terminology. It's not what you think it is, but yeah, so it's tricky. Dick.
Yeah, thank you, Hannes. Yeah, Neil, I agree completely. And I also agree with Hannes too. I can tell you that software engineers don't swim well in pools with politicians and regulators, and they're the ones who come up with these terms. And once they have them, they're stuck. But the point, and the thing about SCITT, which I really like a lot, is it really doesn't matter whether it's static or dynamic, because SCITT gives us the ability to support both. If you put a link into a trust registry and says this points to a label, well, that can be dynamic or static, either one. So that's the beauty of SCITT, is it supports both concepts if people want to use one or the other. So I think we're in pretty good position, guys.
Actually, I tend to agree with, we need to push back where we can to get the terminology. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a trust LTE sort of discussion like we had with 4G and 3G.
Okay, so
I guess, Roy, what you're suggesting then is, and I have no objection to it, is that you would want to go back and change the language in things like the EU CRA and the language that will be coming through the FAR in the U.S. Those are no simple tasks based on my own experience working with some of those folks.
Yeah, I've had many of conversations with lobbyists and so forth who come up with laws that say, hey, we don't know what's going to stick and what's not. But trying to get, if we mislead the public that, hey, a static thing of trust is what we're going for, we're going to do a disservice. I think we have to be very careful in this regard of educating where we can.
Yeah, and I think we can avoid it in our own conversations too, and relabel it as appropriate, just so that we always have a useful concept in mind. Thanks.
Yeah, trust in software is ephemeral. It's trustworthy one day and it may not be the next. So I completely agree with you, Roy. I think it would be a disservice if we gave them a static label and gave them a false sense of security when in fact they're at risk.
okay, so let me jump in. I think it would be pretty useful for us to take a look at this very top view, and Dick, you may be the best person to come in with something to say, let's say I did have this label on a product, IoT product, or on a website or whatever, when I just downloaded the software, and I guess I'm supposed to shine my cell phone on it and bring up the thing, or else click on the link. What do I get? And if we had an idea, a very clear idea of what we get in response to that, then we can start working down from that top level goal toward filling in the blanks, because what we've got so far is what I see is a core building block that is everything's been pushed out of it that we don't fully understand yet, and that's good, because that means that everything in it, hopefully we do fully understand, and it can be locked down. And then that becomes a very solid building block. But now we need to fill in the difference between the gap between what is desired by, regulators and, the public really here, and where this building block is, and to see if we can't start to fill that in. So maybe, the question is there any real proposals for what's supposed to be the response to clicking on the QR code? And maybe we can get some some solid, like that VRF, and I think we should change the name of it to the vendor submission form or something, because VRF is going to always be a problem. But the vendor form, that was really useful. And I don't know if that's that. I don't think that can be the response. I mean, I think when you click on the QR code, I don't think the vendor submission form is going to be it.
Yeah,
it's going to have to be something else. Thanks.
Hank, go ahead.
Yeah, my mic is acting up. You were talking about pointing to dynamic things in Git somehow. I assume that all the things that we will point to are always enshrined in some event-only log, but the thing you probably want to point to and have a smart query on is the feed structure, for example. So that seems to be relatively close together, and I assume that is what Ori also implied, maybe, but I'm guessing now. So maybe that would be a thing that we can talk about when the first solutions that come out are a little more clear. I mean, non-IETF solutions, sorry.
So Hank, so you are saying the feed structure is essentially what basically would be encoded in the QR code and would serve then as a lookup. Is that what you're saying? Did I hear you correctly?
That could be, I think it could be a MUD URL that has a MUD file that also points to that feed structure. It depends on how much you need. Maybe you need more than the things a SCITT service can give to you. There's already a relatively composable MUD file thing that could include, for example, pointers to the correct feed query and the responsible transparency service list, for example. You don't know, maybe there are multiple and such. So I would not say that's directly the feed, but that would be one of the options, yes.
Okay.
So Hannes, what happened with the discussion of company identification? You said you were going to do that through the week. I didn't hear you talk about that.
Yeah, that's it's still ongoing. Like I talked to various people, but there's no clear sense I got. Like there was no clear response. It kind of sounds like a difficult problem, but I'm still onto it. So like we had some ideas also discussed at the hackathon, which I could summarize based on what Ori distributed and some of the stuff that was sent to the mailing list. But it's you know, people seem to be all over the map there on that topic. So still ongoing. Neil?
Great, thanks. Yeah, I had the same idea, Hank, that pointing to a feed either directly or indirectly would be great. And so just to wrap it back to Dick's example, you know, this and the way that Ray framed it, it would be great if I, as a user, could buy some product and there was a QR code, and it would essentially be the vendor claiming compliance with, you know, your set of requirements, but it needs to be dynamic, and that's the benefit of SCITT, and we need to make it clear and interoperable and, you know, continue to work in whatever ways that we need to do that a real person could click on something like that, and the vendor would be responsible for keeping that feed up to date with whether it was actually no longer in compliance, for example. And, you know, so that I think in some sense, and I'm sure that it's more complicated than I'm imagining, but in some sense could be a way to help the vendors clarify what they're claiming and help users figure out what the current status is. And because we're talking about a formally defined compliance claim that they're making, it should be a yes/no answer whether or not something is still in compliance or whether you need an update or whatever. So that would be a really useful use case, is kind of what I think.
Thanks, Neil. Ori.
Thank you. I forgot what I was queued to say.
No problem. We are actually already reaching the end of the hour. I took a lot of notes, but on the last item on this QR code thing, I'm actually wondering whether it would be good to write a short document, a short draft, providing a little bit of a background, like based on these regulatory proposals, and then a description on how we would actually accomplish this in an interoperable form. with SCITT. I think that could be quite useful for anyone who has not been following like this meeting or the discussions on the list recently. Just thinking loud here. Yeah. Good. Dick?
It should just be something to throw into the use case document.
That maybe do, but I think it would because it's more than a use case. I think you also need to have a little bit of a specification part on how you tie the different pieces together.
Yeah, Hannes, this is Dick Brooks. So yeah, I will happily contribute to that, but I would hope that we could do this collaboratively. A few of us put our minds together and come up with something. And I'd also ask that we, not just keep this within SCITT, but I'll actually, publish whatever we produce with the parties that are considering implementation of this, like in this case, the FCC in the US. I don't know who will be doing it over in EU, but I'll bet there's some guys that who will know that answer. But whatever we do here, hopefully we can communicate to others the value that SCITT brings for this specific purpose. So I'm happy to contribute with others.
That would be perfect, since you have a lot of information about the background. I hope someone in the call could work with Dick on such a document. I don't think it needs to be long. Henk.
Honest, did you just volunteer? It's just me?
I kind of volunteered you, like voluntold, as they say.
Yeah, well, we need reviewers too. So if you just want to be a reviewer, that'll work too.
Well, I am a busy reviewer. You should see the comments I have on the architecture document. It looks like a professor reviewed the whole thing.
Well, it's going to take all of us to get this, to get what we want said.
That's true. Henk.
So obviously, I have some thought into this. RADS needed a specific way to refer to verifiers for their testers that can be found easily for relying parties, so they can actually do some of the models. That's also why there's now this conceptual message wrapper and such. And so SCITT has the same issue. We want also have an understanding that the transparency service itself is trustworthy, composed trustworthy, and therefore we have multiple methods to do them. One of them on a lower layer, again, is RADS. So that I actually go with a few proposals that go basically on the abstract level. So what are the requirements on this? What we think? So we have a lot of experience with QR codes since COVID, I think, and expressing a vaccine certificate in a CWT with a QR code is a thing that has been done in Germany, for example. So everybody who knows our QR code for being vaccinated might also know that it's a C1 coded thing. And so I think there are multiple ways to do this. And I assume that we can write up at least a set of requirements derived from standards and compliance regulation. And then and go with some building blocks that would compose a potential solution here. And then we can create visibility with that document. I think, Hannes, that's what your point was. But then we can also already provide some idea where our requirements come from, and most certainly also what IETF building blocks already exist to maybe build a solution for this.
Sounds cool. I think that was also sort of the famous last word for this call. Good. Okay. John and I will definitely sort of ping you regarding some of the action items you received during the last week and also during this summary we did today. So be prepared. And we are going to set up a call for next week again. Think about the agenda. Maybe we'll talk about the we could talk about the API. We could also talk about the update to the architecture document. There have been a few. We can talk about the feed, the details of the feed, in case you guys made some progress there. So whatever it is, please let us know if there's a specific topic you would like to talk about, so we can put it on the agenda and announce the meeting ASAP. Okay. Good. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Good meeting.
Thanks. Bye.
Till next week from my vacation, I assume.
Bye. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Vacation. Excellent.
Yeah.